Um, Good afternoon, Randy sir. We'll just begin in about 5 to 6 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Thank you so much for joining in early. To all the delegates who've joined in, we will begin in just 5 minutes from now. Good afternoon to everyone who's logged in. We will begin in just 2 minutes from now.
There's a blank screen, guys.
Yes, Alok, she's just sharing the screen.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Arya. We're just beginning in a minute. First, your remarks from Mr. Singh, and then begin with the panel.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining in early. Right. So on that note, we will begin the RW Roundtable on battery swapping in India. And with that, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all the speakers and delegates who have joined this RW Roundtable on tapping the potential of battery swapping in India. So this is going to be a webinar series called RW Roundtable on EV charging, starting with potential of battery swapping, then the second one on EV supply equipment, third on role of utilities, and the last one on charging networks and interoperability. The first webinar on battery swapping aims to provide an understanding of the opportunities and challenges in the adoption of battery swapping models in India against the backdrop of the recent draft battery swapping policy launched by NITI Aayog. And we hope that the webinar will provide a platform for a useful exchange of information and ideas on the strategies to meet the objectives of the battery swapping policy and boost EV adoption. And the format of the discussion is going to be that first we'll hear remarks from Mr. Randir Singh from NITI Aayog, and then we'll have a very interesting panel discussion with our four very esteemed panelists. And throughout the event, I would request you to please keep posting your comments, your questions, your queries in the chat box or the Q&A box, because we can summarize all of these comments and send them to NITI Aayog. And because the draft policy is still open for discussion, and it's the discussions or the stakeholder comments are expected to close by June 5th. So on that note, I will now begin this RW Roundtable, and I would like to first invite Mr. Randir Singh, who is Director E-Mobility and Senior Team Member for Advanced Chemistry Cell Program. Mr. Singh, if you could please switch on your video and your audio. Yeah.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are. I'll just take a quick minute to introduce you, sir, and then we can begin with your remarks.
Perfect.
Yeah. So Mr. Singh is an electrical engineer from NIT and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. He's worked in corporate for 12 years before joining NITI Aayog as lateral entrant at director level in e-mobility vertical. He's worked in management positions in Daimler and MAN Truck and Bus India. He's a senior team member for ACC PLI. He's part of ETD 51 Committee for EV Infrastructure Standards and also part of technical jury for battery swapping standards. He's also leading the battery swapping policy formulation at NITI Aayog. With that, sir, we're all ready for your remarks. Requesting you for about 20 minutes or 15 minutes of remarks, and then we'll have an interesting Q&A with the delegates and also from the people who are moderating.
Thank you, Khushbu, and thank you, Renewal Watch, for having me here. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Perfect. Thank you. So, India is already at the inflection point of mobility revolution that is being driven by EVs. The contours of mobility landscape are constantly evolving. In 2021, 329,000 electric vehicles were sold in India, representing a 168% rise when compared to the previous year's 122,000 odd units. Out of the total sales in FY21, 157,000 units were high-speed electric two-wheelers, and 146,000 units sold of L3 electric three-wheelers. Also, the sales of electric four-wheelers increased from 4,600 odd units in 2020 to 14,218 units in 2021. As battery prices are falling globally, EV capital costs would become similar to ICE vehicles, and EV operational costs are already lower than ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. The transition from traditional ICE vehicles to EVs is inevitable, and a robust charging infrastructure is a key prerequisite to achieve an accelerated adoption of EVs in the nation. We need to establish a ubiquitous charging infra which is tailored to the needs of our transportation fleet, India's transportation fleet. EVs traditionally come with their own batteries, which need regular charging using the power supply. Battery swapping is an alternative which involves exchanging discharged batteries for the charged ones. This delinks charging and battery usage and keeps the vehicle in operational mode. Battery swapping is generally used for smaller vehicles such as two and the three wheelers, which have smaller batteries that are easier to swap compared to four wheelers and electric buses. Battery swapping offers three key advantages relative to charging. First is time, space, and cost efficient, provided each swappable battery is actively used. It is directly related to the asset utilization. Further, with existing technologies, charging takes at least 3 to 4 hours, adding to inconvenience and creating range anxiety. The resulting vehicle downtime is particularly significant for freight and the shared mobility vehicles, whereas battery swapping is done in minutes, as the batteries are pre-charged in swap stations. Second, charging stations require more space since vehicles need to be parked next to the chargers during the charging process, whereas battery swapping stations can stack multiple batteries on top of each other and require limited parking, which would address space constraints in urban areas. In fact, swap stations can be compared directly with the ultra fast chargers, wherein the downtime is less than 2 minutes. In fact, it is almost equivalent or less than the time it needs to refuel your IC vehicle. Batteries account for 40 to 60% of EVs, depending upon the size, what size is there in your vehicle. Separating batteries from the EVs could therefore lower the upfront cost of EVs significantly, thereby driving EV adoption. Battery as a service is a common business model used by battery swapping service providers. This involves users purchasing an EV without the battery, which of course lowers the upfront cost, and paying a monthly subscription fee to service providers for swappable batteries throughout the vehicle lifetime. That means you need not to own the batteries. They would be available at subscription model, and you will have the choice of choosing the subscribers of who is providing you that subscription model. It is similar to the telecommunication model wherein you are free to choose whose subscription, whose services you want to take. You want to take Airtel, you want to take Jio, whose services are best suited to your needs, best suited in your area. That means the signals are available in your area. The plan is according to your needs. Similarly here, according to your requirement, the driving conditions, availability of the service by the providers, you will be free to choose the subscription service. Secondly, the subscription service actually not only decouples the battery with the vehicle, but also helps you to release from the technology risk. That obsolescence of the technology is something which is being taken care by the specialists, that is the battery OEMs and the charge point operators. They will be upgrading you time to time, and accordingly your subscription services will vary. But then again, the market driven forces will drive and will help to formulate the best of the available services are available to you at the minimum of the rates possible. While battery swapping is still at nascent stage globally, it is gaining ground, especially for the commercial and the fleet operations. Our focus in the initial phase is to cater to the light EVs, where it is easy to plug and play the batteries from the vehicles to the battery swapping stations. In long term, we see buses also plying with hybrid battery model, fixed battery plus the swappable battery, both together. This will help in lowering the dead weight of the buses and also address the range issues. In addition to this, for commercial two-wheelers and three-wheelers, it's a boon for two reasons. First, it reduces the downtime due to battery issues or charge. Second, it offers the quick top-up. In fact, in this segment, the commercial vehicle segment, it's the downtime which matters a lot. Nobody can afford a downtime on their vehicles, because it's not only the downtime on the vehicles, it's the entire business which gets affected because of this. Entire supply chain gets affected because of this. So we already have a proven test bed from our startups like Sun Mobility, Battery Smart, Bounce, GeoBP, who have actually technologically showcased that the feasibility of battery swapping for electric two-wheelers and electric three-wheelers across multiple models of the vehicles. In fact, Sun Mobility has operated battery swapping stations for e-buses in Gujarat in partnership with Ashok Leyland for almost 500,000 kilometers of e-buses. The final battery swapping policy currently draft is in circulation with last date for feedback, as Kushbu already said, is 5th of June 2022. The final battery swapping policy will comprehensively encompass all tenets, including technical, regulatory, operations, financing, and institutional arrangements. The policy will form the basis for the development of specific standards. In fact, 4 of them are already almost at the verge of completion. Internally, 3 of them has already been floated within the ETT 51 and other committee members. The guidelines for downstream state level implementation, that is something which is very, very important, because without the actual guidelines at the state level implementation, this will remain on paper. Standardization of the battery form factor. I'm talking of the battery form factor, not the cell. Connectors and the communication system will further facilitate interoperability across the battery swapping station and vehicles, as well as increase the confidence amongst the battery manufacturers, OEMs, CPOs, that is charge point operators, and most importantly, who is the most important in this entire chain is the consumer with a clear policy roadmap. The policy also intends to provide level playing field to all battery service providers by creating new avenues of investment in innovative business models, such as battery as a service. With the policy formulation of battery swapping in coordination with relevant government and external stakeholders, we are confident that battery swapping will revolutionize the electric vehicle ecosystem and place EVs at the helm with a further push to adoption of EVs in the nation. So draft is already in circulation. You can access the draft on NITI website and also provide your feedback in the Google form provided there. In addition to this, we will conduct one more. 3 stakeholder consultations are already done. So one more stakeholder consultation we will do by a VC this week. The notification for registration for that consultation will be posted on our website, official NITI social media handles, etc. And currently I'm ready on this form also to take any question regarding the EV and battery storage and clarification, if any, regarding the battery swapping draft also, which is already in circulation for public consultation. I think that's it from my side, because I don't want it to be the one way. It would be more appropriate if you ask some clarification regarding the UIN, regarding the interoperability, regarding the the interoperability at the charging side, discharging side, implementation plan. I'm open for those answers, but the curiosity has to come from your side. Thank you very much. Khushbu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for very brief but very insightful remarks. And we already have 2 of our panelists for the next panel discussion who logged in, Mr. Ravindra Mohan from Charge Plus Zone and Mr. Suhinder Gill from SMEB. Mr. Gill and Mr. Mohan, if you could also switch your videos on, if you have any comments or any queries for Mrs. Singh, I would like to give you a chance first. Mr. Gill, why don't we start with you first?
Yeah, thank you. Like, no questions, absolutely. We're on board for battery swapping. Theoretically, it's a great idea. Only a few things have to be kept in mind, and I think they're all doable. First is return on investments. See, battery swapping works for medium to heavy users as of now. For mild users, we have to see how the cost becomes affordable for mild users. So people who are using less than something like 30 kilometers a day may have to pay heavily for battery swapping. So we have to work out formulas so that the costs are distributed. For example, generally a swapped battery is much more costlier to produce than a non-swapped battery, mainly because of the connectors, because of the reliability and ruggedness it is required to be there, the containerization, and the data handling at the back of it. And also the swapping station costs are very heavy. So on the basis of ROI, if somebody expects a gross return of around 35%, then generally, like for example, one battery is going to be 50,000 rupees in case of a 2 kilowatt hour battery or so, or 1.5 kilowatt hour battery. So for a mild user who's doing 30 kilometer a day, it comes to a tariff around 50 rupees or 60 rupees, which is 2 rupees a kilometer. So that is jugglery that manufacturers of battery swapping has to do, how to come out with discounting models. Second is, if the guy does not even return the battery for 2 days, then it is a dead asset. So somehow it has to be seen that there is a faster rotation in the battery swapping station. Otherwise, the investments will become dead and too high for any profitability. So there will be less private enterprise jumping into it quickly. From that point of view, also one has to see. So first is return on investments that will be worked out by private players along with the NITI Aayog and others, and maybe some sort of a support at the back end from NITI Aayog in terms of subsidy, etc. will work something on that side. Second is standardization. It's easier said than done because technologically it is very difficult for batteries of different chemistries and different type of configurations to talk to each other and talk to the swapping station. Revenue sharing could be an easy thing because that is already done in ATMs and other ways. But on technical configuration, we'll have to really work very hard to see that it doesn't strip off the fineness and perfection in the batteries, because the batteries would be graduating upwards in technology as the time goes. And swapping standardization would have to upgrade itself to see to it that all types of technologies, all types of data handling, all types of chemistries, if they are allowed, they are able to talk to each other and work well. And obviously operational difficulties, like in India, anything starts with vandalism and everything starts with a security guard also standing there on the corner. One has to see to it, how do we take care of things which are operationally, the difficulties are taken care of because it's a high asset value item. And from that point of view, from safety, security, etc., we'll have to see to it the property and the realty is well guarded, well operatable easily, and without any so much of expenses of security guards 24 hours standing on it. And then is it high density? For example, if I have a scooter without a battery, or if I have a scooter without a fuel tank, without a petrol, I don't have to worry for a petrol because I find every 2 kilometers there's a petrol pump. But in case the battery swapping stations are not in enough density, there's a deterrent for a customer who initially may have to go 3 kilometers backside and then go forward to his office or work just to swap his battery. So there should be enough density. And there is a classic grid that is made for a city, which is a 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer grid, which means so many swapping stations have to be there in order to kick off. Otherwise, this will always be a strict no-no for a guy for thinking that I'll be unnecessarily bothered by having a detour just to swap if it is not on my way. And the last bit is, as the time goes, the batteries are going to be much more cheaper perhaps than today. So the asset value is going to be depreciated heavily. So when it comes to replacement of batteries, the asset value would have gone down. So investors are going to keep that in mind who are investing, that your asset is accelerating very sharply. And 4 years from now, when you need a new set of batteries, they'll be much, much cheaper available, whereas your batteries will be still costlier. So how do you justify the investment into the area? All of them are doable, but all of them need a lot of deliberations with the private entrepreneurs and the policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Mr. Singh, do you have any comments to what Mr. Gill just said?
No, very, very valid comments. In fact, we keep engaging on different forums every alternate day, so to say now. More or less, definitely what he said, these are the challenges for sure. And in fact, that is why the policy is going to be an enabler and the facilitator. As far as the standard at the, there's the charging side and the discharging side. The charging side is the swap station, the discharging side is in the vehicle. So when it comes from interoperability perspective at the charging side, this is still something which cannot be done as of now. It will take some time. But as far as the discharging side is concerned, that is within the vehicle, if that is something which is not achieved, then it actually is not going to serve the purpose of the consumer as such. And to achieve the scale and the asset utilization, both the things together, as well as to serve the people, as he rightly said that, see, in case of the battery swapping, you need to have the battery swap station, and it and if you don't have that in the next 1 or 2 kilometers within that, that you may need to take a detour, go to a particular specific place and do there. So the definite business models around the feasibility will develop. For example, if you are somebody right now, what is happening, if you have a three-wheeler or the two-wheeler and your workers are regularly picking up something from, for example, the gig workers, they have to pick up something from a particular site, and every after 5, 10, 20, 25, 30, 40 kilometers, they are going to come back to this place after every service or the delivery. Then definitely that particular area becomes a hub wherein these changes, these swaps can be done. In fact, that is what is happening right now also. Even in the three-wheelers, this is what we have seen. So definitely these business models will develop according to the needs and the requirements. So that is why we always say that the swaps as well as the fixed battery, they will coexist. It's not that one can replace the other, they will only complement. And depending upon the segment with which they are dealing and the requirement of the customer, they will further develop.
Right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mohan, do you have a quick suggestion or a comment to what Mr. Singh just said? You muted, sir. I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation, Khushbu, and opportunity to talk to a gathering of 60 plus people. Yes, I fully agree, Mr. Will, that this has to happen. And as he suggested, we have been operating this battery swapping for last almost 2 years, 1.5 years, more than 1.5 years. We have taken over the assets from Ola in NCR region, and now we are getting into Sonepat and other areas in Haryana. To take it forward, we have put something in Lucknow also. So our experience is field experience I would like to share. One is that since we serve, and these are the last mile delivery of people, that means e-rickshaws. Basically, that is where the maximum battery swapping has taken off, and that is where exactly the whole thing is being forward, in the sense that become most popular, and we see maximum traction there. Having said that, the problem that and I like to bring out notice of, and everybody knows it, there is a small distortion, that is the same fixed battery, when it comes fixed in the vehicle, gets 5% duty, and when you buy it for battery swapping, it becomes 18%. So I think probably the government may correct this distortion. The second thing is subsidies given in the initial capacity of the battery. There is no, every year, there is no flow that we get 3-year life or 2-year life of the battery. The manufacturers of battery are not forced to incorporate standard and avoid the shortcuts method in manufacturing and the deliver that they do. It's our experience of 2, 3, 4 manufacturers that we have tried to use and do POC, etc. And since this is a forum that we are getting, we like to put it, some Mr. Singh is, while designing for battery swapping, communication, if you cannot do it, then what happens? The initial, as Mr. Gill told, 3 kilometer perimeter, all, and once that means you limit the whole thing to 10, 20 kilometers. The battery cannot be charged at any charger by anybody. Then either you should have multiple, or there is a monopoly comes through. This has to be resolved. Otherwise, for people who are going to invest in the infra every 3 kilometers, doesn't mean. That means if I address the range anxiety of 30, that means it has to add 40, 50. These are all, I'm talking specific e-rickshaws which are having the maximum traction of battery swapping. Where if these things are brought in line, and we can quickly replace the steel lead acid batteries, which are more than 70-80%, which has a impact on environment, how they are being disposed, how the cycle is being charged. We don't know the way they are being charged. There's no standardization there, at least on Lithium-ion batteries, there is a standardization, there is a bulk charger, you cannot charge it. If not only standardization on downside on discharging, if some sort of thing can be brought in communication on charging, it will overall it will help. And only government can do it, because we are seeing for 2-3 years industry is not ready. No two manufacturers are ready to talk to each other. Like they have a IC standard for charging the cars, 61815. That means any car can charge at any standard. If similar thing is not done for, at the end, those are also batteries which are getting charged. If something cannot be innovatively thought of and implemented, then I think, as Mr. Gill says, having such a high density, investing these things may be a challenge we look forward to. So few suggestions are, government should surely say maximum size, say 2 kilowatt is maximum size of form factor. So that in case communication riddle is solved, we don't have to have different sort of fixtures because the fixture stability becomes very important depending on Indian roads, whatever is there. They are not very smooth. They have to take a lot of hits, jumps and all. And conductor station anyway we have spoken of. So these are the few things which I have to say. And as Mr. Gill also mentioned, no single silver bullet is solution for this battery swapping or making EV popular. That they say one size doesn't fit all. So what is applicable for three-wheeler as the commercial vehicle in two-wheeler, ride hailing, last mile delivery of people, because where the vehicle is used by the drivers for 16 hours or more, it has to be more on road. Every 3-4 hours, if it is out, you lose business. There is commercial value for every hour it goes for charging. There, it has already become popular in e-rickshaws. It has chance to become popular in ride hailing for two-wheelers and all, because of the advantage that were already told by Mr. Singh and Mr. Gill. And the other one is this the 3 kilometer grade high density that we are talking. Will be possible in some hub and spoke model with a better logistics managed through a mother hub. And I think this has been discussed from 2017 with Professor Jhunjhunwala and all, which they were trying to do some experiment with Z in 2018 and 19, but unfortunately it didn't go off. Where batteries will charge can be near substations, where a lot of cabling and impact of the infrastructure is not there. A large factory of battery swapping and then logistics delivered to the grid that Mr. Gill mentioned. So whatever density is required, but only thing is if we do it, if we create a monopoly, and that means only one type of charger, one type of battery, because it will become difficult to for anybody to put in the initial cost, because anyway, as just now it was mentioned, you are transferring the risk of technology obsolescence from the EV driver to the service provider battery as a service. Now he will be equally hesitant if tomorrow OEM says, this e-rickshaw is going to, this new technology of battery is going to work, give 10 kilometers more. The fellow is going to come demand, why don't you change the battery? The other fellow is giving at this. What do I do before the life cycle of the battery is over? So, this is all chicken egg story. I think the market is evolving fast. Let us see how we do it. But industry and government has to work together so that next steps are taken.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mohan. Mr. Singh, I do see some questions from the various delegates also who joined in today. If you permit, I can just take probably.
Khushbu, actually, Mr. Arya is there, and so is Mr. Lewis. You may want to hear from them first.
Yeah, sure. Mr. Arya, Mr. Lewis requesting if you have any suggestions or quick comments for Mr. Singh, then who is joined in from Niti Aayog. Mr. Arya, would you like to go ahead first? If you have any suggestions or comments on the battery.
No, I think, so first of all, congrats to Niti Aayog and all the support members and ministries who've thought of this kind of a project of coming out with a policy for swapping. I think it's a great step to begin with. My only suggestion, which I think anyway is kind of repetitive because Niti Aayog is already listening to people, but I would strongly say that, you already invited for comments, which you are expecting by 5th of June, would be to do a deep deliberation on those comments. Some of them may look quite opposite to what you may have as an opinion or as a direction, but I think the most important thing which is required in this kind of a transformational change is building of consensus amongst the stakeholders. Success of this policy would be largely dependent on building a by and large huge consensus around it. If that doesn't happen, then there are a lot of potential roadblocks to the policy and the implementation of it. So that's the only point or suggestion I would like to make.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Arya. Mr. Lewis from Magenta, who has also joined. Mr. Lewis, any comment or suggestion that you would like to make?
Well, apologies to the panel. I joined in late and I'm taking this call from the road. And my suggestions would largely come from the EVET platform of Magenta, in which we deploy electric vehicles and also as a charging partner. And we use battery swapping as an option in that fleet. So it is going to be a user kind of a feedback and not so much of an operator of swapping largely. So two points that I would like to make is at this point in time, and it has already been validated by others, is the standardization. The standardization in not only necessarily in the batteries, but in the way the voltage systems operate in the vehicles as well. I think we need to start from the basics. If that is standardized, then the battery sockets, etc., can be standardized. And this becomes an issue from a user perspective when we have to work with different types of battery swapping operators, voltage systems, socket systems. So it has to start from that. That's point number one. Second, I think from a pushback to the OEMs would largely also be because these are swappable systems, unlike safety is going to be a concern. And we are already seeing that in a couple of instances in battery swapping, and not necessarily from what's happening in the traditional fixed battery systems, but the fact that battery swapping is seen as a secondary fixture, but not part of a primary design in the vehicle, which means the battery swapping enclosures are at locations which are for convenience, but not necessarily integral to the core structure of the vehicle. And we are seeing that, especially in Indian roads where you have huge bumps, etc., speed breakers. These are actually causing structural integrity issues to this battery swapping. So these are two inputs that I had to give, which requires starting from basics in this case. And I'm giving a user perspective rather than of a charge point operator perspective to battery swapping systems and solutions.
All right. Mr. Singh, any remarks that you would like to make, or any solutions that you would like to suggest?
Sure, Khushbu. Hi, Atul. Good to see you here. We had earlier long discussion on this. Thanks, Max, for your inputs also. Mr. Mohan, very valid inputs. 2-3 things I would like to take here. One is about, in two-wheeler, the space, not only in two-wheeler automobile sector, in fact, the space always says almost like a real estate. For every they have to fight. Adapters are not going to work in this for sure. So that means the size which is being defined has to exactly match. Then only it will work. The more the movable parts, the more the problems arise. Not only it's about the road condition, it's also about the driving conditions, the atmosphere in which it has to be used. So adapters are not going to work. So definitely the dimensions has to be fixed. One dimension has to be fixed. This is one. So adapters are not going to work. As far as the standards are concerned, specific to the battery swapping, 4 standards are being worked upon. One is for the standardization of the connector. Second, for the communication protocol. Third, for the general and the safety guidelines. And the fourth is central management system. It tackles with the interoperability part. So out of these 4, except the last one, CMS, 3 are already completed, internally circulated for the comments by the BIS. It's already with the most of the members. Some of the members who have joined here might also have seen and given their comments. The end date has already been passed. Fourth one, the draft is also being prepared and it would be soon circulated for the comments. So this is about this. Mr. Mohan, I'm happy that you talked about the interoperability of the charge stations also. So it would be really helpful if you can submit your suggestion on to the Niti Aayog. It would be really helpful for us because that is the area wherein almost every OEM, battery or the vehicle, we are facing a lot of resistance. So some of your comments and the suggestions, because you are operating in this area, would be helpful for us. Please do so.
Yeah, we'll do it, sir.
So yeah, Khushbu, that's it from my side. In case any question, I'm ready to take.
Sure. There are a couple of questions. The first one from Mr. Prashant Sharma is on GST. He's asking that, can we take some reduction in swappable batteries GST?
We have already talked about it in the draft standard, draft policy. We have already talked about this anomaly for the fixed battery with the vehicle and the vehicle with the swappable battery. The 18% and 5% anomaly is there. We already talked about it in the swapping policy.
Right. Then Mr. Naveen Nagpal has a question that as multiple batteries get charged in a battery swapping station, it is important for safety regulations in such stations. So what are the various safety parameters that should be included or provisions for fire suppression or things like that?
So one thing is, if in case you have read the swapping policy, then at the charging point, so the one is charging point, one is the discharging point. Discharging side is with the battery with the vehicle. Charging side is the battery with the swap station. So battery with the swap station, that interoperability, that means the interoperability just like an ATM, wherein you put the ATM card to any ATM machine and you get the money. That level of interoperability will need some time, and also the the cooperation between the different charge point operators to finally arrive at the data exchange protocols, to finally arrive the asset utilization protocols. All those things market needs to develop. It will take time, but as far as at the discharge point, that means battery with the vehicle is concerned, so the three things, that the connector has to be there, it has to be the standard, otherwise there will not be, every battery cannot go to every vehicle, and the communication protocol has to be there. So that is something which will be taken care at the discharge side. Nevertheless, going forward, when this happens at the charging station also, and this is also the long-term view, that there should be a cooperation among the battery swap station charge point operators and the battery OEMs, so that the data happens whenever some battery comes, they exchange the data at what C rate it has to be charged, what is the condition of the battery, whether it is at the end of life, what has to be done with that. All those things would be done, and this would evolve along with the market development. But as of now, as I see at this level, that means at the charge point swap station level, this interoperability will take some time to develop and evolve.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. Just your closing thoughts or any last comments that you would like to make before we move on to the panel discussion and introduce the other
I think, can we take a couple of quick questions? Maybe there are maybe one from Pius and one from Mahima.
Sure. Then Mr. Pius Vartak is asking that will the battery swapping policy allow the battery charging stations to involve the swappable batteries in grid ancillary markets, for example, participation in balancing market for primary frequency control?
I'm sorry, it's not clear.
All right. So he's actually asking that will it allow will swappable batteries be allowed for grid ancillary services, etc.?
Currently, the policy doesn't encompass or covers that part in the scope. But it's a very interesting question. I think why don't give us suggestions in the document, the Google form which we have provided, but elaborative suggestion, and how it will impact the that particular domain, that area, segment, sector.
Right. And then Ms. Mahima Tripathi, who is from Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Laws, IIT Kharagpur, she has a question that in battery swapping policy, the rights and liabilities of various stakeholders towards consumers does not find any place. So what is your take on this, especially since there are a number of accidents that are happening?
So the accidents which has happened right now, I mean, let us not point out whether it's with by the way, there is a differentiation between the removable battery and the battery swapping. So that differentiation people has to understand. This is one. Second thing is the accidents which has happened, there are different factors behind that. Already the investigation team is already on, which is appointed by the MOD, and later on many people are already experts are already in it. And in fact the scope of investigation has also widened, and soon we will see the report coming out along with the guidelines and some of the recommendations. Nevertheless, I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment right now, but there are a few specific issues which in general we can say is one is, the most of the cells are imported. This is actually one of the biggest issues as far as the batteries are concerned, and to control the quality of the cells. So there has to be a self-certification and the thorough checks like cell sorting, different voltage levels of the cells, certain tests at the cell level, certain test reports such as UN 38.3 test report for the cells which are being imported. Tests like UL 1642, those reports should be along with this. So these are certain mandatory things which needs to be pushed for each and every cell which is being imported, along with the self-certification and the internal quality gates which battery and the cell assemblers has to develop. And these are some of the steps which are very much necessary in view of that. In next 2 to 3 years, we will see the in-house and indigenous cells coming out because of the advanced chemistry cell program, whose 4 final bidders has already been announced. And it's already more than a month, in fact, almost 2 months that these bidders are being announced. They have 120 days within which they have to give their plan and other things with the government, where they're going to set up the practice. So I think some of the issues will be tackled through this. But in addition to this, the most important thing is because of this ACC, our country's ecosystem in cell manufacturing is going to develop. And this is just a nudge. So this nudge will create the ecosystem and help the internal systems to develop. And hopefully in the next 2 years, with the minimum 25% localization, that is the condition in the bid, we will see the first cells coming out in this country.
Right. So just one last question from my colleague Sarthak, who wanted to ask you something. Sarthak, please go ahead and ask the question.
A follow-up on the fire accident, the incidents that we have seen in the past few months. So my question is, in case that happens, then who should be liable for it? Should it be the battery manufacturer or the EV manufacturer or both? I just wanted a clarification on this.
You are asking for a battery swapping, right? Or in the current state also when these fires have happened?
In both cases, if it's a fixed battery or a swappable battery, in case it catches fire, who should be liable for it? The battery manufacturer, EV manufacturer, or both?
So give some time for the final recommendations to come out, because I'm not the one who should be pronouncing the judgment here. Let the investigation team come out with the detailed investigation and the recommendation. That would be the right approach here.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Khushbu. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Mr.
It was
Singh.
nice discussing in detail.
Thank you.
All of them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, and we'll send you the summary of whatever we discussed so that you can use it for the finalization of the policy.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye, Atul.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. we're now all set for the panel discussion. And before we begin, I will now quickly introduce all the four panelists, starting in alphabetical order with Mr. Atul Arya. Mr. Atul Arya is Head Energy System Division, Panasonic India. In his current role, he is spearheading Panasonic's ambition to be a leader in the energy storage market. For over 2 decades, he has honed his skills in multicultural environments and various markets, among which are India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and China. He comes with experience in various sectors like manufacturing, data centers, and T&D, and has previously worked in global companies like Siemens, Schneider Electric, and Alstom. Then we have with us Mr. Suhinder Gill, who is CEO, Global Business Hero Eco, and he's also the Director General for Society of Manufacturers of EVs. He's been at this post for the last 11 years, a mechanical engineer from DCE, started his career with Larsen & Toubro in the aerospace division in the satellite launching project of ISRO. He later worked in all the major functions in leading automotive organizations like Hero Motors, Escorts, Yamaha, Honda, Kinetic, and JQ Group in manufacturing, engineering, marketing, international business, and strategy management. He's a certified BPR specialist and has been involved in many JVs and M&As in his career. Then we have Mr. Maxine Lewis, who is founder and managing director Magenta. He's a visionary entrepreneur and a technology enthusiast with over 20 plus years of professional experiences that encompasses 4 areas: automotive, power sector, clean energy solutions, and management consulting. He founded Magenta, India's fully integrated EV solutions company, to support the electric mobility mission through its business services, ChargeGrid, EBET, and informatics and intermediaries. His prior experience includes working with MNCs that include Accenture, Bosch, and Saint-Gobain. He is a mechanical engineer and who also holds an MBA. Lastly, we have Mr. Ravindra Mohan, who is Director Business and Strategy, Charge Plus Zone, an EV charging company with energy as service as their motto. He's mentoring and guiding Charge Plus Zone into EV charging infra business. He's an accomplished professional, having more than 44 years of varied experience of handling global and domestic businesses spanning across power, oil and gas, electrical infra, education, and EV charging. He's earlier served in GSFC University, L&T, BHEL, and Videocon. He is an electrical engineer from Motilal Nehru National Institute of Technology, Allahabad. Great, a very esteemed panel there. We will go one by one and take 3-4 questions from my side so that we have a lot of time for delegates to put up their questions. Since it's a new topic, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions from the people who are attending this event. So in alphabetical order, I will start with Mr. Arya first. Mr. Arya wanted to know that, what are the, we heard Mr. Singh talk about all the different provisions of the battery swapping policy and what is now being planned. But in your view, what is the likely demand and what are the measures that are required for scaling up this battery swapping technology in India?
Okay. So look, broadly, everybody understands the idea of battery swapping. And that's why there are positions taken. Some people are quite strongly in favor of this, and there are some people who are quite strongly against this, and I think both have a different imagination with respect to what battery swapping is as a concept. And of course, people have image of what battery swapping looks like from the cases of Gogoro in Taiwan and some other examples. In India, it is still very nascent. Therefore, there is a lot of, I would say, imagination being used to, project its own image, how it would pan out. In my mind, first of all, I think it's a very, very good step and a very good concept to go ahead with, and for simple reasons. We are seeing a huge demand for electric mobility, especially in 2-wheeler and 3-wheeler space. Now, when we started this journey a few years back, and I've been, listening to one question that when the battery prices are going down, the way it is projected, right? And we've all seen they are not going down. They are either stable or in some cases increasing. And I think for the industry to continue to grow and become significant, shift from IC to battery backed vehicles, the battery price, the price challenge needs to be addressed. And I think battery swapping would address that as a challenge, taking it out from the product of the electric vehicle. Therefore, it is extremely, I think, important. And I think this should grow, in my opinion. And demand would be as big as the number of vehicles which we take up, and so we are seeing a huge scale up in two-wheelers and three-wheelers. I think it should continuously grow. The other point which I believe is extremely important to be addressed is that people have to build consensus, as I spoke earlier, around it, which what it means is that we are talking about standardization. Now, standardization as a policy, of course, can be prescribed by government. Government can come out with the standardization of communication protocols, standardization of maybe sizes, but that's not something which will restrict OEMs to come out with vehicles which are with fixed battery, for example, right? And if the OEMs continue to do that, then this policy may not take off the way it is supposed to take off, right? And I think that's where the consensus has to be built between the OEMs, and battery manufacturers, between the OEMs, battery manufacturers, and the battery as a service supplier companies, which eventually I think will emerge out of the overall ecosystem. And the third most important thing, which I believe needs to be addressed or is critical for this, is the safety and the ability for the battery to live up to the expectations. And I think this is an extremely important area once again, because recently we've seen fires, we've seen so many challenges, and people have already, again, their opinions. I keep reading reports that experts are saying this is because of cell, this is because of BMS, this is because of blah, blah, blah. I think this is because of everything, including poor workmanship, including not willing to pay the right price, everything. But I think this needs to be addressed, and this needs to be demonstrated to the people that battery as a service will enhance the levels of safety and not go down in the levels of safety. I think that's something which needs to be established along with this. So I guess this is the three areas, if we address them rightly, and I think it is not going to be a magical wand that you come out with a policy and tomorrow everything will change. It's not going to be like this. This is going to be a long journey. We need to plan for all these, walking through the journey, through the various steps. And then I'm sure over a period of time, we'll see a great success.
Right. Mr. Gill, your thoughts on how do you see the demand in this space, and what should be the measures that are required to scale this up? Mr. Gill, you muted.
Yeah, it's very clear. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be in 1, 2, 3 years. It's going to take time. And therefore, the strategy has to be do it in smaller lots, in controlled spaces, show success, and then expand. But one thing is certain, that this subsidy thing on e-bikes is not going to be forever. And the day the subsidy tapers off, the e-bikes may go back to where it was selling in hundreds, not in lakhs. So in order to coincide with that point, which is around maybe 2 to 4 to 5 years ahead, the battery swapping is an answer to reduce the cost of ownership of an EV, at least at the capex price. So from that point of view, perhaps it should sit back, and it's a good ramp up to do, so that at that point of time, when government thinks of tapering down the subsidy, the battery swapping takes enough density is created so that it doesn't hurt and doesn't have anything to do with sort of pushing the e-mobility's revolution backwards. So that's one point, surely. But otherwise, on B2B, it's already a success. In three-wheelers, it's a survival, because the guy makes money out of running a lot of time on the road. And for B2C, it's something which is habit forming. It will catch on slowly. Maybe I would give 3 to 5 years back. There's nothing really that can accelerate it, except that guys who are investing, they have to burn a lot of money to make it so attractive for the customers initially for a few years, that any business does. Like they come out with schemes which ensures that there's a conversion of people who are buying EV not to start buying batteries at that point of time, because they find the running cost also comparably much lesser if they would have owned versus as if they would have swapped. So those type of solutions will have to be found out. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Lewis, your thoughts?
Yeah, hi. If on the same question, couple of points. I think battery swapping as an option has specific use cases, and we all know that it may not serve everything, but it will serve something. Right? A fixed battery will serve not everything, but something. But this is the right time in terms of the technology development to happen, right? And I'll just kind of, Soinder Singh ji has already spoken about the business side of it. I'll just give you some technology side of it. Is a couple of points which I think are important over the next couple of months to get sorted. And we spoke about it, standardization, etc. But there's one component of the thermal management system, and we have seen enough and spoken enough about it. We talk about the BMS, and that serves a purpose. But in battery swapping, the thermal management system, not necessarily on the charging side or the battery swapping station, but within battery also would become an important factor, because as in different cities, the temperatures are different. So I think that is some piece of the puzzle on the safety and the quality aspect, which will require some amount of improvisation. At this point, we don't see that happening. It's always the thermal management system outside of the BMS and outside of the battery cluster. It is largely during the charging, right? And we see, and we have seen the tests that during utilization on the road, especially because these swappable batteries are at the lowest ends, most closest to the roadside, so that the ambient temperature on the road is on the high side, they are impacted by it, and that is also one input on because of which the so-called usable percentage of the battery is largely reduced. So a thermal management system, which I think is important, and another one, and which is not often spoken about, and because I think Niti Aayog is also speaking about data, transfer or integration across multiple battery and battery swapping operators. I think one important input, and this is largely operational, and I'm not trying to demean the discussion down, but largely operational is the entire telecommunications aspect. And because these batteries need to have something called as battery locks or SIM card systems. And I don't think yet, essentially because a lot of the times these are not in the open, these are at locations where especially the tier 2, tier 3 cities, where telecommunication is going to be impacted. And hence, some of these considerations have to come through. You may have to use a Cat4 system and not a Cat1 system on the battery BMS modules. These sort of learnings have to be captured. And I think it's important for the entire industry to come together and say, hey, listen, these are the various things. In fact, in this panel itself, there's an amazing amount of learning at different aspects of the entire BMS or the battery swapping solutions. Some of these need to be captured, and it may require some kind of an organization which need to come through, and it may need not necessarily be a government body. Soinder Singh ji has led a lot of these earlier. He's brought together industry veterans and kind of. So there are different pieces of the puzzle. Everyone is trying to solve it separately. But at the end of it, this is an ecosystem which will require all of it to come together. I'm just giving two examples. There are many other examples of where technical solutions need to come together, and on the back of which amazing business models can be created. It's just a matter of time that these things. So I'm just laying it on the table as far as this is concerned, but I do feel a value. In fact, in Bangalore itself, we operate a number of vehicles which are using the battery swapping stations. We do participate with a lot of OEMs, and every day is a new learning. Every small aspect becomes a new learning, and sometimes it's an aha moment. It's sometimes not about the great technology of the battery cell. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, listen, how high is your battery container from the bottommost position on the road? So these are the various very interesting conversations we could have, and it needs to come together. But last point I just would like to place to the panel and to the audience largely as well is, I think at any point in time, let us not compromise safety over anything else. And we have seen this. Unfortunately, we have come to a point where we have to speak so much about safety. And it may not only, it may necessarily mean in the cells that we use. It may talk about the BMS or the thermal management system or the entire container systems that are used, all of that should be focused on only one point, is how safe can that element be. Once safety is in place, then optimization on cost can be done, not the other way around, where cost optimization is the first parameter and then safety is an afterthought. I think that is a great learning we need to take care in battery swapping solutions that we are trying to build right now. Thank you so much.
Right. Mr. Mohan, would you like to add to that, since you have a fair bit of experience in this, managing and operating actual battery swapping stations? Where do you see the demand going and what has been your experience? You muted, so you will have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. See, everybody has spoken everything about it, so nothing much left for me to add. But only thing what I want to add is, from design point of view, the battery swapping takes away freedom of design of EV OEMs, because that is where we talk of form factor of the batteries. To that extent, optimization, as Mr. Singh also mentioned, it could be within and all. So until the industry as a whole works and the form factor is not standardized, if there is no form factor standardization of the battery pack, no way you can have upward, that means charging points or chargers cannot be optimized, because if you have different sizes of battery, then the whole thing goes out of the window. So that is one thing. And the other thing that we are in operation, we are finding is a lot of sales we serve, as you told, we serve a very restricted, which is e-rickshaws, which are popular in NCR, Lucknow, and Sonipat and all. You can always see that e-vehicle means a different type of autos which are. They come from bottom of pyramid. None of them, hardly anybody owns the e-rickshaw, say, very few, 1% or 2%. Everybody is hiring and doing it. So the maintenance of the EV, if you don't own the EV and own the battery, it gets a lot of education is there. We are trying to do it, but then that is a challenge where some sort of help from the NGOs like Renewal Watch or something can help in educating these people to maintain. Because at the end, if he doesn't work, he doesn't earn, not many people get attracted to these things. And if you don't electrify our three-wheeler, I don't think Indian roads can ever be talked of being electrified, because they are the maximum ones who actually on the road, those tailpipes are the ones which one of the, you cannot talk of Euro 6 and all in those areas, which pollute the roads of the cities. Having said that, the second one is, since they are not owning, what we are getting into issue is, since ownership of the battery lies with us, and किसी को खेत में काम करना है, somebody has to go, so it simply vanishes, leaving with the chap who has hired it, and there is nothing in it. We as an industry are trying to evolve, but if some sort of system is built, or where these rickshaws parking are there, instead of the owner gali mein park, for us to locate and get the batteries before they go into discharge, always one team always keep roaming and doing it whenever there is a holiday season comes, which is quite often for India. Holi, then some Kharif season, this season, every time you find people go away. So these are the few things we say. And another thing when we found was a smartphone which is taken for granted by us. We found 95% of these people don't have, those who drive the e-rickshaw. So what all platform we developed for their swapping, automation, payment, and everything had to be being redesigned to see that their analog phones can work and serve. And one thing one says that battery is most polluting element in whole electrification transportation system. It takes a lot of energy to get manufactured. Its disposal is a challenge. So good that government is giving a lot of importance to it. And as my earlier speakers meant, safety is always a challenge. The way it is handled, In swappable, it becomes more. Because in a fixed battery, at least OEM fixes everything tightly and gives. Here, every time it is removed and put. So fungibility, the robustness and all has to be there. So those vehicles which are like, earlier, gas system in CNG and all were left to local people to retrofit. But once the OEMs started doing it, and for OEMs to do it, fixing of form factor becomes very important. So it is an egg and chicken story. Till you fix this, OEMs cannot get safety of, as we talk in the vehicle, is not ensured because it is not manufactured. It is done in the roadside workshop, not in a factory. So whatever good design may be, but its quality repeatedly becomes a challenge.
Right.
And the other one to support this open system is, if you don't have this, then if Government of India wants startup OEMs to take care of this battery as a energy as service business model to emerge, nobody will have the deep pockets to take one OEM, multiply it enough. There are enough vehicles to do it. It will always be a challenge. So till this standardization across the 3 or 4 domains that we spoke of, and interoperability is implemented on the ground, the scalability that we are looking forward will always be challenged. It doesn't make a very good sense to have a closed loop and monopoly. Closed loop systems are going to be monopoly. And then we know what happens when there is a monopoly, whether it's telecommunication or anything. So here I take any other questions on this. These are our experience with operating battery as a service thing for last 1.5 years.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mohan. Mr. Gill, were you saying something? Sorry.
Me?
Oh, I thought you were saying something. Okay.
Yeah. You see, I was thinking India is a jugaad country. Huh? So somebody is going to surely come out with a jugaad of, don't come to the swapping station, I'll bring your battery home, like your milk bottles every day morning. So you charge the battery somewhere outside the city in a container, air-conditioned container, and somebody delivers at your home, and then you can have all these problems taken care of. If your form factor is different, one section of batteries will be that, another one will be that. I'm sure somebody's going to come out with such ideas. So to start with, everything comes out very principally well, but then there are side tracks and people make business out of it. I'm waiting for the day when my batteries are delivered to my home every day morning at 6 in the morning.
Right. That's surely a possibility. Mr. Arya, the next question for you. Being an energy storage player, and with so much discussion happening around battery design and safety considerations, what do you think needs to be done in terms of having, what sort of standards are required to ensure that such incidents don't happen?
Well, I think it's not about standards anymore. We have standards, by the way. AIS 156 is by and large quite a reasonable standard for the safety of a battery. I think it's more about implementation of those standards in terms of being more strict about it. And we just now, before this, we were having a discussion with Mr. Randir Singh, and somebody asked a question about the liability, right? So I think we need to really have a clarity on this kind of a framework, that who owns the liability and what kind of liabilities are there. Since it's a new subject, I think a lot of this needs to be developed over a period of time, but I think we need to kind of hasten the speed and perhaps even think through about it while we are implementing, for example, the battery swapping policy. Just a few things on the battery swapping policy also, because you asked a question about safety. Now, in the policy, there is a battery charging station, there is a battery swapping station, and a lot of things are defined, right? And they are quite generic in some sense that people can have those kind of swapping stations and charging stations defined. And then, of course, AIS 156 has been referenced. But I think a lot more needs to be done, because there is temperature, there is a power connection, there is so many other things which are there, and there is a human interface. People are going to exchange batteries, or people are going to install batteries. So there is another element which is being added to this. And I guess this needs to be studied deeply to come out with certain safety restrictions or standards, even for the swap stations or the charging stations, apart from what we have as a standard for battery alone. And then obviously, like I said, we need to define the liabilities around it. Who is going to be liable? Who, for example, is technically qualified to install a battery swapping station? Because it can run as a business for sure, right? But what is the technical specification and who is qualified to do that? What is the framework you can make a judgment? Because if you see today some of the videos which are there, people don't even know how to react when a scooter catches fire. People try to put water because they see fire and they put water without realizing that water cannot douse this fire. Absolutely no. Right now, that's a basic question which people have to answer. Therefore, when you are putting a multiple number of batteries in one place and they are being charged, right, and there could be any untoward incident, and if there is a fire which is emerging, what is the fire handling mechanism for that? Are our fire safety departments in each state or each municipality, are they really tuned for this? Look, we can always define standards, but we will always find there will be incidents, right? We have building fire standards, but there are fires in the buildings. We have electrical short circuit protection devices, but still these happen. So I think these two tracks we need to balance. We need to have the right kind of, let's say, standards and liabilities defined. B, the right framework for implementation of these, and C, then what is required to prevent all this, or in case of incidents, what kind of actions need to be taken, what kind of infrastructure needs to be developed. I guess if we just go ahead with making policies for only expansion of business, which is great, I think we need to definitely work very hard, not just from the government, but from the industry, for expansion of this new opportunity called electric mobility and anything and everything related to that. But we need to be cognizant of the fact that growth of this business is also dependent on the reliability of this business. If people see scooters catching fire, they are already scared. If people see battery swap stations catching fire, they are definitely not going to touch, right? People are going to definitely go back to the petrol scooters or petrol cars, no matter what is the price of petrol, because people want to have their lives first. So I guess there is a lot need to be done, especially on implementation of standards and creating an infrastructure for prevention and post-incident scenarios.
Right. So let me then ask you that, in case of a swapping sort of an arrangement where you have batteries getting swapped and one battery is already being swapped like a number of times, who is then responsible for the warranties or the guarantees in that case?
Look, today, I think we need to clarify two things. One is that technical side of any business, which is there a technology, to handle battery swapping? Is there a technology to make a battery which is robust? That's one part of it. And second is the business side of it. So in my opinion, if anyone who is trying to make money out of a business, then that company or that individual must own the responsibilities or the liabilities. As it goes in the constitution also, the rights and obligations go hand in hand. They are the two sides of the same coin. So I can't have only my rights. I have to have my obligations there. So if I'm making money out of setting up a swapping station or selling a battery or selling a two-wheeler or selling a car or whatever, right? Including selling electricity. If I buy an MCB and if MCB doesn't function well, it doesn't do its job of protecting me from the fire, then obviously it's the MCB supplier who needs to be held responsible or liable for this kind of an incident. So in my opinion, it's quite simple. Technology is one thing, but the one who deploys the combinations of those technologies, so a swapping station is going to be a pot of multiple technologies. It's going to be having charging as a technology. It's going to be having battery as a technology. It's going to be having cabinet as a technology, perhaps HVAC, perhaps some other civil thing. And then of course, internet connectivity and blah, blah, blah. And everything has to work beautifully as a machine so that the right performance is delivered keeping safety in mind, right? And I think we need to have lots and lots of procedures. For example, end of life of battery. We are talking about recycling of the battery when the battery reaches end of life. Now, who defines that, right? If I have installed a battery and I'm a businessman, my interest is to squeeze as much as possible from this, and to that extent I might want to continue deploying those batteries even if they become unsafe from the end of life perspective, right? And there has to be someone who is going to keep watch on this, and I think it's me as a businessman who is making money out of it should be held responsible for not letting the end of life batteries into the system and mandatorily put them into recycling or whatever mechanism is decided. So I think there is a lot of such aspects which needs to be paid attention in this kind of a policy. And one policy document may not be enough because this is a new industry. So perhaps we need to do a multiple versions of it. And as somebody said in the previous, just now, somebody mentioned that we need to try out in a particular area or a particular city, for example. And I think I always take this example of Delhi Metro. We did a great job with Delhi installing metro, though they are not related, but in some sense they're related. Once DMRC established its credibility of doing projects well, in time, within budget, with excellent quality, today DMRC is driving this in pretty much all the states, and that's a model. So I think we need to build that model and continue to learn with that.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Lewis, a slightly different question for you. When we talk about interoperability, then how will that work in battery swapping, and what role you feel can, data sharing or transparency have in this entire thing?
Sure. The basic ethos of interoperability is standardization. Right? And Mohanji has spoken about it. He's talked about the fact that, so I'll not deliberate on that piece, but interoperability from a data perspective is what I'm going to talk about. Essentially, you are having these assets full of energy, and you need these energy packs, if I were to call, to be speaking to the vehicle and speaking to the cloud as well. Because as a charge point operator or a battery swapping operator, I need to know where the assets are, right? At any point in time. Not only necessary to know where my assets are, but also to know what is the value of the assets in terms of energy value, right? And also provide another level of service to say, okay, the charge is low, etc., etc. Now, interoperability is at multiple levels, and I'm talking about not challenge. The batteries have to be swappable between the swapping stations also. At this point, there are two different companies which are operating this, and to provide an end-to-end ecosystem for a customer who's buying a vehicle. He doesn't care about the batteries. He should be able to swap it different swapping partners. That's point number one. Second, that also
Mr. Lewis, I think there's some connection issue at your end.
Enough and many OEMs in the three-wheeler space with whom the swapping station systems have to operate with. Correct? So you see the multiple levels of interoperability, and hence one of the last points is around the fact that it's data interoperability, which also is required now under the Niti Aayog policy, which requires some element of data to be positioned. So interoperability will have to be broken across these three levels. One is interoperability across the OEM platforms. Interoperability. Then the next level is with the various partners. The easiest part is the technology layer, right? So if you were to understand these challenges across these three, is when you will be able to solve it. Otherwise, it just becomes an interoperability. There's a big problem without peeling the layers of, you'll not be able to solve it. Right. Now, the challenges come out with these very interesting options. And this is the best part that we have as a country, I believe, is the ability to give a kickstart. Gogoro, Atul Arya-ji talked about the Gogoro model is one successful model. Internationally, there are no standardization for swapping other than that model. And that's a unitary model. India today has the option of writing down the standards the same way we have the option to write the standards for two-wheeler charging for fixed battery and DC charging. The same option exists with us today, and we should not miss this opportunity, is what I believe. Because if you were to miss this, because no one else and nowhere else is this being done. Right. It's only in India. I'm very happy that such kind of conversations is happening, which means also we are trying to peel off these layers of interoperability, which also means that solutions will come. Right? Give it time and it will happen. But I think the intent with the industry exists. And the esteemed panel knows this. The intent exists. It's just a way somehow this needs to come. And if we were to do that, we define the standards for interoperability of battery swapping. I think we will essentially become some pioneers in this space, and India can then define what's really happening globally and not wait for someone else to come and give the standards to us. That's my answer on interoperability.
Right. I believe Mr. Arya has to leave in just 2 to 3 minutes time. I'll just ask you a quick delegate question before you leave. This is from Mr. Nagpal. Can EVs be promoted with a small fixed battery for short distance travel and a swappable battery slot for putting additional battery in case EV user wants to travel a longer distance? I think you're muted, Mr. Arya. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I think very interesting subject. Like I said, since we haven't tried swapping at that scale with multiple ideas, there are only some very, very brief imaginations about it as of now. But I think a very brilliant suggestion that one can have a small fixed battery for short distances and then the swappable battery. And this is how pretty much everybody does. And somebody asked me, should that mean that we will have larger batteries, etc.? I think no. Because in a two-wheeler, typically we have scooters and motorcycles. There is a large tank which can have 7 or 8 or 10 liters of petrol. But the most common behavior is to get it filled with 100 or 200 rupees because that's what I need it every day and that's what I can afford. So why not? I think this is an extremely useful kind of an application that people would like to have smaller batteries because they know how much are they going to commute. And I think this is also going to be sort of, another way to bring down the costs. The swappable batteries themselves can be smaller, and then one can always have an option of adding more 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe different sizes of batteries. So this is very early days. I think Niti Aayog trying to do standardization on dimension, etc. Perhaps version 1 could be a good idea, but version 2, they will probably need more sizes and more form factors themselves because different use cases would be there, different kind of applications would be there. A commuter which is going to office or a delivery boy or a fleet, they are very, very different applications and very, very different kind of affordability patterns. So I guess there's going to be multiple combinations of this.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Arya. I believe that you have a...
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will have to take a leave. I'm extremely sorry. I'm going to miss the rest of discussion.
Thank you so
all the
much
very best
for
to
joining
everyone.
in. Thank you. Bye. Right. I will take some audience questions now since we have a few minutes remaining for the discussion. I'll put up the next question to Mr. Mohan. Mr. Mohan, Ms. Agarwal, Ms. Sagarika Agarwal wants to know that is a single connector selected or multiple connectors are possible for standardization? And can you shed some light on what sort of connectors are these?
Today, the three-wheeler e-rickshaws, which are where this system is most popular, uses 2 types of connectors. One is Anderson, other is Chicory. Both have their plus and minus. And after experimentation, we have zeroed in for Anderson type of connector because in Chicory we find the type of users that use it are not sophisticated enough, where they can half rotate and lift and do it. It's like, US, you have those bottles, medicine bottles, just don't open. You have to press it and go in one direction to open it. So that sort of thing is there. So Chicory is an advanced version, but I think we are zeroing in on another type of connectors. And it is possible to have that. And for at least e-rickshaw business, by and large, people in swapping area have these 2 standards to follow.
Right. Mr. Lewis, I'll just take one last question before we can, close this. Since you're also, present as Charge Plus, as Charge Grid in the broader EV charging space also, and you have your own platform for network management, etc. also. Maybe you can take up this question. This is from Mr. Naveen. That what about load management by respective discoms? Can battery charging be controlled by discom's central monitoring system, and decision of charging can be controlled considering peak and off-peak period of discom?
Sajid, thank you so much for that question. I think it's an interesting question. In fact, battery swapping station, as compared to charging infrastructure, have the ability to go in for something called as managed charging, right? Because you have not one battery or one vehicle or one central BMS. You have multiple, let's say 3x3 array of batteries, right? And all of these can be controlled at a battery swapping station level, but can also be controlled at a discom level. Now, interestingly, this could become unlike EV charging, where let's say a 50 kilowatt charger, you need to have a load of sanction load of 50 kilowatt. Here, a swapping station can operate with a lower sanction load, and you can kind of tap down, if I were to call it, or throttle down the charging. So those options do exist. However, at this point in time, largely given the kind of battery swapping system that we have seen in the largely in the space, these are non-throttled systems, because the BMSs are not active BMSs. They are just, I mean, there are no control elements. However, these options do exist. And I think as we progress, that is going to be a strong possibility. Second point, your battery swapping station can also become load management systems for the grid balancing as well. What essentially you're doing, you're having these battery storage elements. If you have a much larger system, these can effectively be used as a grid storage and grid balancing, because typically and Mohanji comes from that background, he can also answer, is the fact that solar becomes a big input provider. You require balancing systems out. Rather than a vehicle, a swapping station is a lot more right now. It's not happening. I want to be upfront about it, but this is a strong possibility, an easier possibility in swapping as compared to charging. I hope I've answered your question around that.
Yeah, and there's one question.
I just add to this what Louis has said. The issue is, one, as somebody asked in question to Mr. Singh on Niti Aayog, can the same battery be used for grid balancing and all? There are no policies, not that. One is the policy issue. If it is solved also, then Mr. Arya has left. The question we would have answered. See, today 2000 cycles or 3000 cycle is the charging cycle where the guarantees are there. Can you go to 5000? Because there the technology innovation is left. Because I have purchased a battery to be eased with EK where somebody has subscribed it. I want to use it for that purpose, because I won't be likely to get that sort of incentive if I do the grid balancing by recycling and discharging the battery to the grid and taking it back. In addition to the additional equipment that I need for doing this work. Let's just add to what is
right. And there was just one last question from Mr. Arun for Mr. Lewis only, that he's actually developing, this battery swapping system, it seems, and he can't find examples. So he has a question for you. How will the industry respond if there's a model developed for operator agnostic swapping, roaming in swapping in brackets? Asking because we're developing one and cannot find examples of it worldwide.
Ask you to talk to me.
Sure, then maybe Mr. Mohan, then you would like to take
that. Yeah.
So this is what exactly we are looking for. That's what I told. It has to be agnostic of the technology, that is communication that happens between the battery BMS and the charger and the size of battery. If these things can be managed, if there could be a system cheap enough to manage this, probably yes, why not? And we can do POC with him, whatever he wants to do.
Sure.
Just one additional point. Sure. Mohanji is the right person. Only thing is, from an advice perspective, don't think of it just developing a technology in isolation, because you will need the partners along with you, like Mohanji, ChargeZone. You will also need the OEMs to partner with you. Otherwise, you will have developed this in isolation, but you will have a great product, but not a product fit. So just be aware of it. Do not, especially in an ecosystem view, any development will have to have you'll have to take all the players along. Otherwise, you will have an isolated system. Again, you will become one of the players who becomes another isolated player. And Mohanji will be the best person to talk about it. Yeah.
Levis, in fact, if he has something, we can together again go back with the suggestion to Mr. Singh has specifically asked, because the existing charger manufacturers are not ready to make a battery agnostic chargers. So if he has a scheme, whatever he needs, we can go then through regulations and those sort of things, we can come down and enforce.
Absolutely.
Everybody is saying it is not possible. If there is somebody startup is ready to break the glass ceiling and do it, why not?
Why not? Absolutely.
Then maybe Mr. Mohan, I can share your email address.
Yeah, please.
Mr. Arun. I'll do
Right.
that. Yeah, and this is one question from my colleague Sarthak. He wants to ask something on RE-powered charging stations.
Yes, so I think in our initial discussion with Maxine, we had talked about rooftop solar being used for charging this charging infrastructure. So are there any pilot studies on the same being used for battery swapping stations? That feasible, not feasible?
Sure. So like we have experience in setting up the solar-based EV charging station. We did something similar on the swapping station as well in Bengaluru in our office. We did that, but what happens is battery swapping by itself again uses the console systems use a 230 volt system. So effectively solar to which is a DC system to an AC system, and back from AC system to again a DC system. So there is this transition. So till such time you are not putting up solar dedicated for battery swapping, it's an additional add-on, but not primary source of power to battery swapping, it works out. I want to give that input. I'm not saying that it cannot be possible, but the amount of solar panels that you will be required and the expected turnaround on the battery. See, battery swapping is a turnaround business. You need to turn around. It's like a Udupi hotel where you need to turn around as many tables. Here you need to turn around as many cycles on the charging. So here the requirement is that of quick charging as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, solar is not super amenable. So renewable energy based or solar based charging till such time it is one form of energy source works. Second point, and Mohanji will also speak about it, is the fact that we are looking at open access as a solution, both for charging, fixed charging, and also for battery swapping. But that requires a 1 megawatt minimum point load systems. If that is possible, you have a super swapping station that could work out, wherein you are taking the power from the grid, but it is actually being sourced from a solar-based, from a solar power plant. So I hope I've answered both your questions. One is, don't think of solar as a direct, think of it as an enabler. Second, wait and hope that there are some changes in the minimum criteria for open access.
Yeah. And the other one is, Sarthak, what happens is round-trip efficiencies also impacts.
Okay.
You're getting a point. If they see today in Europe and US, there are POCs being done to take the solar panel directly and charge the batteries and then use it for the battery charging. That is what is being developed is a battery bank. And from battery bank, there are dispensers attached to it, depending on what you need. So that POCs are, as we speak, is being done in Europe and US and all. Yeah, it's now that since they are doing for charging, technology exists for charging the battery bank, from there use a dispenser. That means you get off whether you need for 150 kilowatt charger or 50 kilowatt charger, it's like a tap. The presently charger is all integrated with the AC to DC conversion. So they have bifurcated it, made the battery storage separately, and then different dispensers depending on what type of car. And this has been generally been enabled due to high 100 kilowatt and odd type of batteries that are instead of 30-40 kilowatt batteries which are coming earlier. The new cars or luxury cars which are having 90-100 kilowatt battery, that has forced us, instead of just investing in 100 kilo, 150 kilowatt charger, it is sitting idle. So they said, let us have only small dispensers and the battery storage somewhere. And that is where renewable is going to be more effective, and it will eliminate the round trip efficiencies of 5, 7, 8% that again will help to make whole viable and improve the TOC of the whole system.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Mohan, for taking time out for this discussion. We thank you for staying till all the questions were also answered. So thank you so much. And
Our pleasure.
with that, we've come to the end of this webinar. So I would like to thank all our speakers and delegates for taking out time for the roundtable today. We hope that the discussions were useful. I would also like to inform you that we will be submitting all the suggestions to Niti Aayog. So if you have any more suggestions, please feel free to email them to us and we'll make sure that they reach Niti Aayog. Also, our next RW Roundtable is on EV supply equipment on June 13th. For the people who already attended this event, we'll be automatically sending you the login link for that one, so you need not register again. And we do hope to see you at our next roundtable as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Lewis, Mr. Mohan. Thank you. Also, we are organizing 3 other webinars, like I said, on EV charging. One is on EV supply equipment, which is on June 13th. One is on role of utilities on July 4, and charging networks and interoperability on July 25. So if you want to be a part of any of those, please write to us and we'll send you an invite. Khushi, I think we can stop recording and we can end in another 3-4 minutes.